The 14th century was an era of severe trials for France. The Hundred Years' War demanded resources from the kingdom that previously seemed unimaginable. The army of that time was not just soldiers, but a giant mechanism consuming vast amounts of resources. The foundation of the French host was the knightly class. Each knight was an autonomous combat unit requiring massive investment. The primary resource for a knight was the horse, or more accurately, several horses at once. A noble warrior required a destrier, a powerful war horse for battle. Besides that, the retinue included riding horses for travel and pack animals for cargo. On average, there were 3 to 5 horses per rider. A typical army of 10,000 riders meant the presence of 30 or 40,000 head of livestock. Each animal daily required about 3 kilograms of oats. This means that every day the army needed over 100 tons of grain just for the horses. Added to this was hay, which occupied an enormous volume during transport. The logistics of forage supply became a general's worst nightmare. If the oats ran out, France's military power literally ground to a halt. Now, let us turn our attention to the rations of the soldiers and knights themselves. Medieval medicine forbade drinking raw water from rivers. The main source of liquid for the army was wine or cheap beer. An ordinary soldier drank about 1.5 liters of wine per day. Food provisions included about 1 kilogram of bread and half a kilogram of meat per person. Meat was most often salted to keep it from spoiling on the road. However, livestock, cows, sheep, and pigs were often driven behind the army. This created additional difficulties, as the herd slowed the pace of movement. The army's supply train stretched for many kilometers, becoming a vulnerable target. A 14th century warrior's equipment was another category of colossal expense. The transition from chainmail to plate armor sharply increased the cost of gear. A knight's full suit of armor cost as much as the annual income of an entire village. Even arrowheads and crossbow bolts required tons of high-quality iron. Crossbowmen, often hired from Genoa, demanded high daily pay. Mercenaries had to be paid in hard currency, which was always in short supply in the treasury. Producing one set of plate armor required hundreds of hours of skilled labor. Iron for swords was imported, requiring foreign exchange. Every arrow in an archer's quiver represented the labor of several masters.
King Philip VI was forced to take extreme measures to finance the campaigns. He manipulated the weight of the coinage, reducing the content of precious metals. Inflation became an inevitable consequence of every major campaign. The famous salt tax, the gabelle, was introduced, placing a heavy burden on the people. The state literally squeezed all means out of the peasantry to buy swords and horses. But resources are not just food and money, they are also people. Withdrawing thousands of peasants from the fields to work in the supply train led to problems in the provinces. Master armorers worked day and night, consuming vast amounts of charcoal. To cross rivers, the army required the services of carpenters and bridge builders. Every siege of a castle required the construction of complex machines, trebuchets, and battering rams. Timber for them was harvested from entire forests in the vicinity. Leather for harnesses, wax for candles, canvas for tents. The list is endless. The tents of the nobility were true mobile palaces with expensive furniture. Hundreds of additional carts and oxen were needed to transport them. Even ordinary horseshoes became a scarce resource during long campaigns. The army turned into a nomadic city that produced nothing. Organizing warehouses in the rear required a complex bureaucratic system. Royal officials kept a strict accounting of every grain delivery. The territories through which the troops passed remained a scorched wasteland. Soldiers practiced the tactic of devastation to feed themselves at the enemy's expense, but French land suffered from its defenders no less than from the invaders. However, corruption and theft flourished even in those harsh times. Often only half of what was allocated by the treasury reached the soldiers. Resource losses from disease and poor storage conditions were enormous. Wet gunpowder and rotten grain became reasons for defeat. Vast sums were spent on ransoming noble knights from captivity. After the Battle of Poitiers, France was effectively ruined by the ransom demands for the king. Gold left the country at an immense speed.